All right. Hi, everyone. We are live on Facebook. Ashok Gupta is here for our interview and live Q&A. So if you have questions, I'm going to be first asking some of the questions that were pre-submitted, and then I'll be like toggling back to the Facebooks for live questions too. So for those who are here live, so Ashok Gupta is the founder and creator of the Gupta program, brain retraining program for limbic system disorders. So I think most people will be familiar with Ashok, but the Gupta program was the first brain retraining program of this type. So for me, it's like Ashok is one of the people I most admire because this is a very difficult thing to do when you've got all the resources and the courses and the coaches and the groups and the forums. But to have created this when no one else was doing it is something that is really, really incredible to me. So I believe it's the most popular program right now. I don't know if we have all the stats, but it's a very, very popular program. And so Ashok had his own story with CFS back in the 90s. At his worst, he was quite severe, and then he recovered fully from using these sorts of tools that he really kind of created, and now is more formalized into the programs that I think most people have some familiarity with. All right, so Ashok, that's the intro. Welcome.
Thank you so much, Corinne. Thank you for that wonderful introduction.
I'm not going to start with the questions that most people start with because I think people here in my community do know who you are. I think they know at least a bit about brain retraining, if not have actually tried it, and are familiar with the concept. However, the first two questions, for those that are kind of like, I barely know what this is, the first two questions are going to expand on what this actually is. So the first questions, people submitted a few questions, and well, the first one kind of came as a compilation because I've posted a bit about my own experience with brain retraining and gone from 0.1% of CFS to like somewhere between 50 to 70%, and also fully recovered from MCS and IBS and long COVID, which was on top of the CFS. So I'm just posting a bit about my journey like along the way. And so people have had some thoughts, questions. All the questions are really like in good faith here. So it's not like a debate, but like someone said that brain retraining is like CBT therapy, cognitive behavioral therapy, or it's similar to that, or basically that. A lot of people sort of had the feeling that we're ignoring our body, ignoring our symptoms, overriding our symptoms, that it's basically like a positive thinking program, and that we have to ignore like maybe even like real physical tests that show abnormalities. So I thought that would be a good starting question because it kind of gets to like, okay, what is it, like, without going through like every step of the Gupta program, because we're going to get a little more into like what parts of the program, but like what is it? If it's not those things, what is it?
Yeah, that's a great place to talk, Corinne. So thank you for for people who submitted those questions. You know, it can be very confusing in modern medicine because we tend to categorize things as this is treating my physical illness and this is treating the mental and emotional consequences of that illness. And yet that is not how our brain and our nervous system actually functions. That is an artificial way that we structure things. And so when we think about these conditions, we tend to look at them through the filter of modern medicine. And yet modern medicine hasn't been able to do much for these types of modern conditions like chronic fatigue, long COVID. Therefore, we have to throw away, not throw away, but moderate or modify our model of how the body works, how the brain works, how it interacts to be able to treat these new conditions. And if we use the same model that we think is appropriate for things like cancer and diabetes and heart disease, if we start using that same model for these inflammatory conditions, we find that actually it's really difficult to understand what's going on or what's causing them. So to answer that question, I think that what would be helpful for people is to just, if I briefly went through the hypothesis, and then I can come to that question of how is this different to CBT or positive thinking or just calming your mind, and what exactly is this program doing, and then how does it work? Because unless we understand the model behind it, it's very difficult to describe what actually we're doing. So I always start with the biggest question of all: why are we here? Yeah, it's a beautiful question because it's a philosophical question, but also a physiological question or an evolutionary biology type question. We are here because over millions of years, the number one priority of our brain, our nervous system, our body, is to survive. So survival is the number one priority. And that gives us a clue to mold illness and chemical sensitivities as to what causes these conditions. And therefore, I believe that we are threatened by so many things in our environment. So we are threatened by physical dangers, we are threatened by biological dangers, we are threatened by emotional dangers. And the body is designed to respond to that threat and get back to normal. Because if the body responds to a threat and doesn't get back to normal, then it's always in threat mode. But imagine if that threat system itself starts malfunctioning. So as an example, let's take let's go straight into mold. So the mold is a toxin that our brain and our body detects as dangerous for us. And therefore, when we are in the presence of that particular mold, the brain will make an assessment. Is that dangerous? Should we do something about it? Yeah. And generally, that first reaction is to detoxify the body or prevent that chemical from coming into the body. So our eyes will stream, our nose will stream, we will have like an allergic reaction type response, because that is the body's way of getting rid of whatever has just entered the body. Yeah? That will be a kind of natural reaction. And there'll be other consequences to that. But essentially, it's an inflammatory reaction, an immune reaction. But imagine if once that reaction has occurred, if the brain thinks, I'm not sure if I fully got rid of that threat. And because my number one strategy is survival, survival is more important than your well-being. The brain goes into this altered state. And this, I believe, is the absolute clue to these inflammatory conditions. The brain says, I'm not sure if we fully fought off this threat, so I'm going to continue the fight, continue the defensive response, which are then the symptoms of mold. And what I'm going to do is now, before I used to respond to the threat of mold. So the first initiating factor might have been 100% mold exposure. When I say 100%, an intense mold exposure. But then what the body thinks is, because it is efficient, it thinks, you know what, even an 80% exposure is dangerous. Let me create exactly the same response. But then maybe even a 50% exposure is just as bad. Let me create 100% response. But maybe even a 10%, a 5% exposure to mold and the toxins and mycotoxins that are associated with it could be dangerous. Let me create an inflammatory response and a defensive response. And that's where someone can go from living normally around mold. You know, they still have the same genes, the same background, the same body, but they have that first exposure. And after that, the brain gets stuck. It gets stuck in that hyperdefensive response because survival is more important than our well-being. And once it gets stuck in that response, it then keeps triggering the immune system and the nervous system, inflammatory responses, creating the symptoms that are associated with mold illness or chemical sensitivities. And then those symptoms are detected back in the brain, and the brain says, there's still something wrong. Because why am I feeling so awful? Maybe we are in the presence of mold or large amounts of mold which are dangerous. Let me re-trigger the immune system. And the body gets caught in a loop, firing and responding to itself. So it's not only responding to the external trigger of small amounts of mold now, but even the internal state as well. And it gets stuck in that state. And the analogy that we often use is the kingdom analogy. So imagine, Corinne, that you are Queen Corinne of your kingdom. Okay, so imagine your kingdom is your body, yeah, and you are the queen of it, and you are the prefrontal cortex, the leader of your body. And imagine that you have an army, which is your nervous system, and a navy, which is your immune system. And all of a sudden, your body, i.e. your kingdom, is under drought. So because of the drought, your kingdom is weaker, your army is weaker, and your navy is weaker. Now in comes a threat, an invading army, or an invading dragon, or whatever you want to imagine. There's an invader coming in. And that invader, in this case, may be the mold. Yeah, the mycotoxins, the mold exposure. And the army and navy are weak now because the body's in drought. Oh, the kingdom is in a drought. So the army and navy would have to work twice as hard to fight off this invader. So they work really hard to fight it off. But they're not sure if they've fully fought it off. They think they have, but the mold might be hiding in the forest or the jungle or somewhere in the body. So the soldiers, they keep fighting, because they say it's better to fire off our weapons of war than to let the army back in, this invader back in. So they're firing off their weapons of war, which is all the inflammation in the body, and some of that inflammation falls back into sensitive parts of the body, which is causing the autoinflammation. And once the system is set up, they get more and more resources from the body, and therefore we have this altered state, which is no longer homeostasis or balance. It is a state of chronic inflammatory response, loads of symptoms, which drains the mind and body of resources. We no longer have energy. We feel tired. We feel it's not just tiredness, it's exhaustion, brain fog, dizziness, difficulty sleeping. All of these symptoms are a result of our immune system and nervous system overfiring. And what is brain retraining then? Well, brain retraining is when they come to the weekly meeting with Queen Corinne, the Army and Navy generals will say, Queen Corinne, we need all the resources of the kingdom, the wheat, the water, food, everything should be channeled to the Army and Navy so they can continue with that inflammatory response and that defensive response. And what brain retraining is at that point, training the brain that we are no longer under threat from the mold or the chemicals. And the generals won't believe it the first time or the second time or the third time, but it's through regular training that they eventually get the message. There's a few questions that your audience have asked there, which I will answer absolutely directly. First of all, that brain retraining is not CBT. It is not positive thinking. It is not any kind of traditional psychotherapy or any type of therapy that we've seen. It may seem similar in the sense that we are dealing with brain patterns, and sometimes CBT deals with that, but this is very different because it is through the power of repetition. And the example is, let's say you're learning to drive. Now, if upon your first lesson, your first driving lesson, you said to yourself, right, I'm going to be really positive about driving, positive thinking, really, really positive. I'm going to think about all the negative thoughts I have about learning to drive, and I'm going to let go of those negative thoughts, and that will help me to learn to drive. CBT is not going to help you learn to drive. What is going to help you learn to drive is the practical practice of it. So moving the steering wheel, the gear stick, pressing the gas, pressing the brake, and training your nervous system to learn how to drive a car. And that takes repetition and consistency, right? Which is why brain retraining is about consistency. Until eventually your brain gets the message, right, and then you can drive a car all by yourself, you can eat a sandwich, you can do whatever you want, and you've automated that process in your brain. In a similar way, brain retraining is very different to traditional therapies. It is about repetition and regular retraining of the brain's responses. And then the second question that your team have asked there is, or your audience is, are we ignoring our symptoms? Are we potentially creating more problems down the line because we're exposing our body to dangerous chemicals or whatever it may be? Now, in the Gupta program, we are very clear that it is okay in a practical way to minimize your exposures up to a practical level. But we can't all go and live in a caravan in Arizona. I mean, that doesn't even help. What that does is train your brain even more that these things are dangerous. So what this is about is reducing practically the exposures, but at the same time recognizing that we believe the majority of the response is coming from our brain's hyperactivity, the hyper response. So we're training our brain to get back to a level of normality in terms of its response. Now, people might say, but hang on, if we do that, then we're going to retoxify our body. The toxification, in our view, in our humble view, is not necessarily coming from the chemicals themselves, but it's coming because our own detoxification system shuts down when we are in fight or flight response or inflammatory response. We know that people with inflammatory conditions, their bodies retoxify and they don't detoxify effectively. So that is why through brain retraining, your natural, you stimulate the parasympathetic nervous system, your natural detoxification systems kick in, and you're able to heal more effectively. So there, in a nutshell, that's the hypothesis, and then answering those two questions.
Yeah, there's definitely two different parts where you're actually like bringing your body into healing so that it can detox. Like for me, my body stopped producing, I'm going to say it a little bit wrong, but ceruloplasmin. And so my copper couldn't regulate. And like that's a direct, like mainstream medicine knows that that's because of stress. Like we have some mainstream medicine evidence now and then. So my copper went way, way, way up, and then that caused other symptoms. So there's part of it where it was like the physical, there's a physical healing, and then there's also like brain, like pathways in the brain, which is I see it as slightly separate, although I guess there's some overlap there. But one question people had, and I think it segues really well from that. I was going to ask it later, but with mold, to me it's different than CFS, long COVID. Even than MCS and EHS to me, and I think a lot of people think this, and you can tell us how you see it. But with long COVID, the virus is gone at some point, and then the brain still loops, and it still creates like the inflammation, and it still creates physical symptoms, but the actual virus is gone. Whereas with mold, there is a lot of mold in homes, and it's difficult to know when the mold was gone. And yes, the brain does react the same or even worse to smaller and smaller amounts, but there is also a physical factor, like an environmental physical factor where, and some of the questions were about like my home is actually has mold still, or like how do I know if the level is okay? Because it's hard to measure precisely. So I think it's a trickier one than the others. But you could tell us your view, and then also how do people know that they can start? I have maybe a follow up there, but let's start there.
Yeah, let's start there. You know, in most environments where we aren't like living in an arid desert, for instance, there will be mold. It is a natural occurrence throughout the world, and especially to an extent in the US, where previously a lot of homes were built through wood versus brick. There's even more of a propensity for mold to exist, for damp to enter. Yeah, and so the thing is, time and time again, people with mold, they tell me not everybody in the house reacts to the mold. So this is really our barometer. There might be 5 people living in a home, yet only one person is responding or reacting to the mold. So if this was objectively an environmental toxin, and there are times when there have been chemical spillages where everyone in a city or a village has been affected and they're all getting respiratory issues or challenges, that you can see X plus Y equals Z. There is a toxin, everybody's responding to it, everyone needs to remove themselves from that particular environmental toxin. Yeah, and we see this in water. When water gets contaminated, everyone gets certain things. But in a household, you might only get one person responding. Now we have to understand that. Why are 4 people in that household not reacting? Their bodies are not reacting to that particular mold, but one person's is. Now, many people will say, but that might be also genetic, because we know there is a genetic component where our detoxification systems may not be responding effectively, etc., etc. And therefore, that would be the reason people might say, I'm reacting, but other people aren't reacting. Or people will say, well, I've got a buildup of toxins in my body, and therefore I'm overloaded with toxins, and therefore my body is reacting to any further toxins coming into my body. So that might be the logical way that people might say, why are 4 people not reacting, but one person is? I would like us to think or open our mind to another possibility, which is many people with mold illness, chemical sensitivities, they remember the period of time when it started. Yeah? Now, some people may feel they've had a reactivity all their lives, but many people say that there was one particular period of time when perhaps there was quite a lot of mold in their home where they learnt, or their brain learned, that there was danger present. And therefore, the person had the same genetics, the same background, the same family members, they're all in the same home, and yet that one person, for whatever reason, suddenly their brains learnt to react to the mold, and then they continue to react to the mold. And according to what I said earlier, even now a 5% exposure compared to 100% exposure, even a few percent exposure can then create a response that actually is at safe levels for that particular person. And therefore, what I would encourage people to do is, of course, have the natural remediation of your house, yeah, within reason, without obsessing over it. And yet we have to live in the modern world. We have to live in homes. And therefore, if we've done the best that we can, then we work on our brain, we reduce that reactivity, our brain will become less reactive, and therefore our natural ability to detoxify mycotoxins and the environmental factors will improve. And that's how so many of our patients heal and recover from mold illness and chemicals, is when their own system is fine-tuned and refined not to overreact. So it's almost like the body's system and the way it responds to mold, or has learned how to respond, is creating the very problem itself. It's got stuck in a vicious cycle. So unless someone is able to say, this is the reason that one person is responding, but the other 4 people in the household are not responding, for us, the idea that the brain has become hyperprotective in that one person is the most logical conclusion. And we also see this in brain scans. So people with mold illness and various other chemical sensitivities, there is evidence that there is an enlargement of the cerebellum, which is the part of the brain that is detecting and sensing chemicals and things in our environment. The olfactory cortex or system is also magnified, is activated more. So there's a magnification of incoming signals of what's going on in our environment. And therefore, that is our hypothesis, that the brain is hypervigilant, it's hyperdefensive, it's detecting threats, and then over-responding to those threats.
Yeah, I agree. I do think it has been trickier, the mold part for me. And I do understand why people are concerned about, like, is my house good enough? But for me, it's been like a step-by-step process. Like, I would say my hypersensitivity is gone. Like, I used to be hypersensitive to, like, clothing from the thrift store or something like that. So that part has gone away. And, I felt like I needed to start in like a very excellent house, let's say, and let those kind of physical parts heal and let my detox come back on. And I think it will be more with time that I will actually begin to go into more, let's say, average hotels. Like, maybe if I want to just travel to anywhere, that will be kind of like a further step. So it's not necessarily like on day one you just go back into like the average home or the average hotel. But some people there was a few people actually that were like, my home isn't great, like it's showing up in tests as not great. Should I? And they would like to move, or they like, they're saving up, or they're looking for another place. But a lot of people, it seemed like quite a few people were worried about, like, should I start this now? Like, would it work? And is it a good, like, both, like, would it work? Like, would it be effective? And is it a good idea to start where you are?
No, great questions. And I think that what we say to people is, if practically you are in the environment that you are in and it's difficult for you to move, then start with the brain retraining, because there's no other game in town. Like, what else can you do?
Yeah.
And having that faith and trust in this hypothesis. And I explain why. We've had people with mold illness that use the program to heal. So they had the remediation and they thought, right, I've had the remediation, but I've still got symptoms. Let me use the program. And then they used the program. They fully healed from mold. They had another test in their home, and their home was full of mold. Like, for us, that's like as scientific and evidence that you can get, that how has someone been able to retrain their mold reactivity, get it to 80, 90, 100%, so they are hardly responding at all, and yet they have another test and their home test positive for mold, as do many homes and many environments in the US, because it is unless you're in the arid dry air regions, there's a lot of moisture around, and somehow the way that we've built homes, unfortunately, especially in the US, has made it more open to them becoming moldy. And for us, therefore, it's like, just start the program, whatever environment you're in, whatever situation you're in. There's never a good time to think this is the best time to start. It's actually just starting and trusting, and then whatever environment you're in, you're not dependent on the environment anymore. Whatever environment you're in, it'll become easier. And as you've mentioned, Corinne, it's a step-by-step process. So we start right now in our own homes, and we improve the situation so we can function day to day in our own homes. And then very gently, we're not fans of just, cold turkey. Gently, you think about other environments. You may go into a shopping center, or you may go into another home, and you just use the tools to stop the brain responding. And then you start going into more environments and more environments, until eventually you no longer have the mold illness, because your brain trusts that you are no longer in that physical danger anymore. So it is a step-by-step process. And we see it time and time again, whether people have had the remediation or not, people are able to improve. And when we did a recent clinical audit of our patients, and actually this was quite a number of years ago, before we had some of the modern tools in our program, so this is quite an old study, we found a 67% improvement in mold illness after 3 months, and an 85% improvement in multiple chemical sensitivities. And that was an independently published or independently run clinical audit of our patients. And we're doing actually another study on mold, so we're going to have some objective results with an independent organization pretty soon. But that shows you that this isn't just hearsay. This is where we're publishing medical papers on this, where, as far as I know, we're the only brain retraining program that has objective scientific research. And hopefully that also inspires others to take this path and actually truly believe that it's not about just the mold. It's not X plus Y equals Z. It is about our own reactivity to our environment.
Yeah, it is. It is very helpful that the medical community and the brain retraining community are like coming closer and closer together, because I think it probably started as quite like an alternative solution. And then, not that the medical community had solutions to like MCS and CFS anyway, but there's more and more evidence from the medical side. Gupta programs doing like real, both the audited, like independently audited, but also like studies. And yeah, a lot of the evidence is coming. They're now like, there's doctors that like medical doctors understand it, and there's just so much coming together that it is going to come fully together at some point. But
absolutely. And Karina, there's something else I wanted to add, which is a great analogy in terms of allergy research. I believe in which areas I think there's a lot of parallels with peanut allergies. Now, it's so interesting, isn't it? This is a very interesting area where we know that more and more people in the population are getting peanut allergies, especially children. We know that it's when their mothers now don't have peanuts. So originally the advice was, don't have peanuts when you're pregnant. But that then caused more children to have peanut allergies. Right? And so now that we're finding that mothers who actually eat small amounts of peanuts during pregnancy, they're less likely, the children are less likely to have peanut allergies. And now they're talking about microdosing, where not in the the chemical, the drug side, but in terms of peanuts. So children who have peanut allergies, they're giving them micro doses of the peanut, and then over time, the child no longer has a peanut allergy. This is the perfect metaphor for what we're talking about. The peanut, the humble peanut, is actually not necessarily threatening for the body, and yet the brain learns inappropriately that a peanut is threatening. So what are they doing? They're brain retraining through microdosing that peanut to that child, until eventually the brain feels safe enough to say, well, I had a small amount and it was fine. And then I had an even bigger amount and that was fine. And then a bigger amount and that was fine. And in some way, that is a form of brain retraining. And we believe that that is operating the insular part of the brain, that the insular eventually learns that these chemicals, this peanut, is no longer dangerous. So to the mold community, I really hope that people are opening their minds to the fact that if we look at a range of different chemicals, food sensitivities, peanuts, that people are reacting to, there are now strides being made to show that it's not necessarily objectively the trigger itself, the peanuts or the mold, but it is how our brain is responding inappropriately to these things. And there's plenty of precedent for that inappropriate response.
The peanut examples are really good examples, well, because it shows that, or it's a good example that like the symptoms are real. Like you can die from a peanut allergy, and your mold symptoms are like very physical. Like a lot of them are very physical. A lot of them can be tested by a doctor. So it's not like I mean, I think people are kind of knowing this now, but like it's not like all in your head, because if it was all in your head, you could like get rid of this in maybe like 3 days, because you just needed like maybe a hypnotherapist or something, and you would just clear it. So like it's more complicated than just like I don't believe in it anymore, but it is a good example because the brain alone can create very real symptoms, even when it's fully like a limbic system response. But
yeah, so on that point, I just wanted to add there that I think, as you say, it's really important. No one would ever go to a peanut allergy sufferer and say, this is all in your mind. No, because it's not all in their mind, but it is in their brain. Their brain perceives peanuts as dangerous, so they create a massive reaction. As we know, people can die of peanut allergies. Therefore, that shows us it's very real. And as far as the brain is concerned, as we said, number one priority is survival. The brain thinks I will only survive if I have this massive reaction to this peanut that's been ingested. Yeah, which makes no logical sense, but the brain doesn't care. It's made that decision. And yet, in a similar way, for me, it's a similar analogy that the brain learns that mold is dangerous, that this chemical is dangerous, and it needs to be trained. And people are having a lot of success now. There were some amazing studies coming out with peanut allergies where they're able to actually heal and cure peanut allergies through micro amounts that are being given to children. And in a similar way, I'm not saying the analogy is the same with mold, where we give micro amounts of mold. That's not the answer. But we can train our brain through these brain retraining techniques to be convinced that this is safe in normal amounts. And people might say, oh no, but what happens if I have a really big exposure? In our experience, it's just saying normal amounts of mold that the average person in the population is exposed to. Our brain needs to learn that that is safe. And once it learns that, we can go about our normal day and a normal life, avoiding the really moldy places, but at least being able to lead a normal life.
Yeah, I just wanted to add one more thing to like the question that the few people asked about starting brain retraining from a moldy house. If they absolutely can't move or absolutely can't move right now, I don't see any downside in doing it, and there's a lot of potential. Like I even know people that were in quite a bad house and they recovered like 50, 60%, and they recovered enough that they then had the resources to move or to remediate. So, and that's probably not the normal case, but there is like, I don't see a major downside. I think you can also like, it's sort of like if you had to take a medication, you don't just stop the medication. Maybe in the morning you have to take your medication and you have to think about that in a more, maybe you even have to go to the doctor, and like, you're kind of in that other paradigm where you're like, oh, okay. If you're in the moldy house in the morning, maybe you have to think about, okay, I need to call the contractor to do the remediation, or I need to look through listings to move. But then it's not the most ideal situation, but I think then for the rest of the day, you can still tell it, because people were wondering like, how can I tell my body I'm safe if I'm trying to remediate or trying to move? And it's like, I wasn't really objectively safe in the beginning either, but I would spend like the majority, or like 60% of my day telling my body like, it's safe right now. Like the rest of this day is safe. Like I've already done the things that I need to do in my practical life. And then it's safe right now. It's not really telling because a lot of people are worried, like I'm telling my body that it's completely safe. And it might be completely safe if you are it's really, really tricky with mold because you might actually be completely safe if you're overreacting to this like 5% of mold. So that is like
Yeah.
an actual possibility. But there's another
Yeah.
possibility where someone's actually like in a pretty high amount of mold and they're trying to leave, but the brain retraining is still, I don't really see the downside there as long as you're, yeah, it's, I know I'm
Yeah.
overcomplicating it, but
But no, I don't think you are. I think there's a very important balance here, which is we are not saying that your brain is not responding to the mold. The brain and the body is definitely responding to the mold. It's definitely hypersensitive to it. It is creating a physical reaction in the body. And what we're saying is, at the flip side, it's almost your question is how much is it absolutely down to objectively the amount of mold in the house versus how much it is it down to the how reactive the brain is. And in some ways, it's difficult for people to hear, but it doesn't really matter. Because what matters is if you have to be in that environment, why not do the brain retraining, get your own detoxification systems to the optimum level, and therefore you can better handle the environment that you are in. And as you said, there's nothing to lose by doing that. And we've known many people who have remediated, who haven't remediated, but have still been able to heal themselves from mold illness. An analogy I would give is, when you are let's say the right analogy that I want to just create here. But if you are living in that moldy home and every day you are saying this is a moldy house, this is terrible, then of course it's training the brain that there is something dangerous going on. And let's say we look at wearables. So there's a big thing right now to wear wearables for your sleep, as an example, your stress. Now, what the evidence shows is when you have a wearable that is tracking your sleep or tracking your stress levels, the people who have those wearables actually are more stressed and have worse sleep than people who don't. Now, why is that? Because when our Fitbit or our Apple Watch is saying, hey, your sleep was really awful last night, right? What that's doing is giving you feedback and making you more anxious and more stressed, which then makes your sleep even worse that night, which then turns into that chain reaction. Yeah, and people can read the studies. Getting sleep feedback data is making people sleep worse. Getting feedback on their stress levels is making it worse, unless they're actively doing something about it or something that they can do about it. So in a similar way, if we keep getting feedback that our home is moldy, it is terrible, this is an awful place to live, all that does is increase the stress levels, increase the inflammatory response, because the brain is being confirmed in its diagnosis that it's in a dangerous environment, and around we go. So in some ways, what we say to people is, you are where you are. If you can't move, just focus on the brain retraining. Stop monitoring your home, all of that, because that is just giving you the negative feedback. Trust that your brain is in that situation. It can heal and it will recover and you can lead a normal life. And that trust and faith is the hardest thing, because when our brain is telling us danger, danger, and we've got to say there's no danger, it feels like it's a contradiction. And it's working through that contradiction, saying, right now, my brain can still feel safe, even if there is mold in my environment. And that takes a leap of faith. It's not a leap of faith. It just takes that commitment to say, I believe in this way of thinking. So it is a complete mindset shift from there is mold in my home, it's dangerous. The only way I can heal is from that, by removing myself or removing the mold, to a different way of thinking, which is my brain has learned to become hyperreactive. That's the core issue. That is what I need to focus on and retrain. And the challenge we've got is that scientifically, from a scientific material perspective, we are trained to think that there's something wrong in our environment, our body is responding, that is it, that is end of story. And that is often what we hear in support groups, or well-meaning support groups. But that is what is time and time again the thing. You can't heal from mold illness, you have to remediate, there's no other way, you have to go and live somewhere. The more you keep telling someone that, the more the brain confirms its messaging that we are in a dangerous environment and there's nothing we can do about it. And it creates helplessness, powerlessness, and a sense of feeling a victim of being attacked by this mold. And I would love people to reverse that and realize that they are empowered to heal.
Yeah, it's definitely a paradigm shift. Um, And I do understand why it is trickier for some people than others. And it's also really tricky because I did have those extreme reactions to very, very small amounts. And that is really tricky to come out of. But yeah, I mean, so far I'm doing quite well with it. I think I'm going to check the Facebook because I have to toggle to another. Okay, so I'm going to read the comments that are coming in now just to see if there's important follow-up. Yeah, I am gonna go to that question of someone asked about resistance, but I first want to complete a little bit more on mold because I know that this is a really, really big topic, and it isn't often talked about in this much detail with brain training and mold. So a couple other people were wondering about difficult situations. Like one person was in a tent and it wasn't super like comfortable. Like it wasn't just an easy situation. Another person lives in a truck, the back of the truck, and people are wondering like, how do you start when your situation is pretty difficult and they're not quite ready for various reasons, to move into a house. Sometimes it's financial, and sometimes it's just so hypersensitive that they're not quite ready. But yeah, do you want to say anything about that?
Yeah, and I do empathize with that when you're having to live in a car, live in a trailer, where just because the reactions are so bad, or you have financial challenges, that's a very difficult situation to be in. So I really empathize with that, and I think the starting point is whatever you can do to emotionally calm the mind down is always going to be beneficial. Yeah. And even within our app, we have loads of free resources, free meditations, free breathing techniques that people can just use to help calm the mind. And of course, there's loads of stuff out there. Just to, as a starting point, begin to open up some opportunities for your ability to cope with a situation like that. And that is often the starting point of our program, which is how do we relax the nervous system initially? Because the brain is not neuroplastic if it's stressed. Neuroplastic meaning it's flexible and can change its reaction. It can only change if it's relaxed. And therefore, what can you do initially to support that? And whatever relaxes people, whatever helps people get to more inner peace is going to be beneficial, just as a starting point before they're ready for brain training.
Yeah, I just wanted to share that my starting point, my housing was very unstable. I was living in hotels due to a certain hypersensitivity. My financial situation was very not safe feeling, or objectively. There were also other difficulties, like there was super loud live music parties from my neighbors, and I was like 99.9% bedbound. So I think a lot of people start with not everyone has the same situation, not everyone's in a tent, but a lot of people are starting with like I also had like a medical situation that was very, very not safe. But yeah, so many people are starting with like a situation like that, or one of those situations. It's not like some people are just starting with an easy life. And like most of us have been in limbic loops for so long that life became super complicated. So I really, for the first 6 months, I focused on meditation very intensively because my brain couldn't even do the 7 steps, which is part of the Gupta program in the beginning. I did get to it and do it like on the schedule, basically. So these are kind of 2 different parts of the program, but I did meditation quite intensively, enough to make significant progress just with that. And again, like, it wasn't like I was feeling 100% safe all day long, because I still had like this financial situation, but I would just show my brain that it was safe to meditate for the night, for the evening. And then with time, I got better. and then I was able to work more, and then I improved my financial situation, and then I was safer, and then I was safer so I could retrain better. And so like that's my example. Did you want to add anything to that? Or
Yes, it is stages. It is stages. And some people, depending on our personality traits, we suddenly might want to jump in there and think, I want to do all of it or nothing. If we've got a black and white kind of way of thinking about things. And I think you've done the right thing there, which is sometimes with these programs, it's taking the first step and having the improvement, and then the next step and taking the improvement, and realizing that this is a lifelong improvement program. So people often do our program and think, yes, I wanted to overcome my illness and now I have, but there's so much more to maintaining that health for the rest of your life. And our program helps you then not just get well, which is what a lot of programs might focus on, but also to stay well and to stay calm and deal with your stresses, and even to be trauma informed, because many people who get these types of conditions, not everybody, but certainly a higher percentage, may have a background of trauma. And therefore, recognizing that we may have more reactions to stressful environments and stressful situations than the average person. And that can then re-trigger a dip, can re-trigger some symptoms coming back, and how those mechanisms work. Therefore, that self-awareness of our stress levels, keeping on top of our nervous system dysregulation for the rest of our lives is incredibly important.
yeah, I'll just, because we started talking about the sections of the program, maybe I'll just add a little more, and you can add a little more. Like there's also there's quite a, I mean, those are the two cores, right? Like the meditation and the 7 steps. There's also, but there's a lot of additional, like there's a breath work, which is really helpful. Well, one of the meditations is called Soften and Flow, which has also been super core for me. And I actually haven't found anything else. Like there's a lot of free meditations now, but I actually haven't found anything like Soften and Flow, because it's just so helpful for people that are, like if you can't get your brain to, especially when you can't get your brain to meditate, or you can't get your brain to do the 7 steps because the symptoms are high or the anxiety is high. That's just I mean, it's in the meditation section, but it's just a really special meditation. And then there's also the parts work, which has been incredibly helpful for me. It wasn't like the first thing I did, and it's not really recommended as like the first step, but for me it was like, as I progressed, I could see more and more that these personality types, for CFS, it's very achiever part. And the helper is also big with a lot of CFS people. I know Ashok and I both have a degree in international development studies from a top school. And you can just tell from that that we both had the achiever and we both had the helper, because you can tell even just from that. So the exercises in that have been, like the helper exercise has changed me completely. I've done it every time that I've been triggered in that part. Like I've stopped my work and done the exercise and like come back. So it's sort of like and I think also people could get confused there because they're like, oh, the achiever causes CFS. It's not exactly one-to-one. It's like the achiever folds into other parts of the brain that drive the illness. So it's like, it's a couple steps. It's like 2 steps away from that, but it does drive a lot of how we, like I'm talking about CFS right now, but it drives like how we push ourselves too much and how we keep going into the push cross cycle, just as a simple example.
Yes, and it's interesting you mentioned the different personality traits according to the different conditions.
Yeah.
Of course, we're not saying it's psychological anyway. We're just saying it's a risk factor. If someone has an achiever, or rather an unhealthy achiever, because we all want to achieve, but an unhealthy achiever, they will push their bodies beyond their limits. And we know with chronic fatigue, or long COVID, it's when we have a virus, but we pushed our body too hard and we don't rest. With mold illness and chemical sensitivities, what we find is there can be a wide range of different risk factors, but one of them tends to be what we call the safety seeker. And that's where we don't perceive our environment as safe. Sometimes it can be because of past trauma. And therefore, the brain translates that into, not only are we not emotionally safe in our environment, but we are not physically or environmentally safe because we are being attacked by the various chemicals potentially around us. And so I think that's really fascinating as well, that recognizing, are we someone that feels safe in the world, or are we in like this kind of siege mentality that there's a threatening world around us, a threatening environment, and therefore we need to watch out? That's not saying, once again, that mold is psychological or in the mind in any way at all. It's simply saying it becomes a risk factor for the brain. And modern medicine splits these things up. So modern medicine, if you go to a modern hospital, the psychology department is over here, immunology is over here, psychiatry is here. There's all these different departments which are separated, and yet the brain does not work like that at all. The brain, the parts of the brain that create emotional responses are also responsible for immune responses, also responsible for pain responses. Now, I find that absolutely fascinating. So whenever we have an illness, let's say you have flu, how do you feel? You feel the physical symptoms because of the immune system kicking in, but you also engage in what the brain calls, or what we call, sickness behavior, where you feel tired, you feel exhausted, you feel demotivated, you feel down, because the brain wants you to rest and do nothing and feel awful, so that your body is rested and the immune system has got the maximum chance of fighting off the virus. So the brain is very clever. It deliberately makes you feel exhausted, tired, negative, because it doesn't want you to do anything. So in a similar way, there is no such thing as a physical illness. There's no such thing as an emotional illness. It is a package of defensive responses to ensure survival. And when we see mold illness like that, then we can realize, actually, this is just a defensive response that's become overactive. It's almost our defense systems loving us too much. They want to protect us too much, and that's why they're over responding. And we can gently retrain them back to normal.
Yeah, so let's go to a couple of the live questions. Someone asked for financial hardship. I just wanted to make a note that there's a money back guarantee, which is not a common thing with many brain retraining programs. So, and I know that they do honor it. I do know for sure. So there is very little risk. I think that the brain actually perceives risk differently with brain retraining, which is interesting, but it's also really just not really, I shouldn't say just, but it actually is part of that sort of that limbic resistance, and the protector parts and the different parts actually come into play right from the beginning sometimes. So, and then the other question was about resistance. So okay, so we're switching gears a little bit, because I think resistance, like overcoming the resistance is, if you've already kind of had a little bit of even a little bit of the paradigm change, or a lot of the paradigm change, and you want to do the program, overcoming the resistance is now the biggest step. It's very difficult for some of us. I mean, some people start on day one, and like one of the coaches in the Gupta program went from bedbound to walking on day 2. So I'm not like telling people they need to have a lot of resistance, but for those of us like me who did kind of like battle the brain every day, and let me see what the question was exactly. Oh no, there's a lot too. Oh no, that's a lot more questions now. Okay, sorry, I can't get back to it quickly.
That's okay. No, I mean, I get the gist of what you're asking there, which is there can be resistance, because when the body or the brain is in a flow state of how it responds, it's like water running down a river, right? Water running down a river channel. It just becomes automatic. And to shift that way of thinking feels awkward for the mind. To shift, as we've talked about today, to shift your brain from, I'm in a moldy environment, I'm being attacked by mold around me and I need to get out of here, to shift from that to, actually my environment is safe and it's more about my reactivity to the mold. That is a very, very big paradigm shift for us to take. And the brain doesn't like necessarily big change that may compromise our survival or threaten our survival. So it likes sticking to the way that it believes will help us survive, and will resist a new bit of information. So that's almost itself a protective response. protecting you from another way of looking at it. Because if you're not in a safe environment, why would you want to take up a new perspective? So it's recognizing that. Secondly, it's about our belief. So our motivation is based upon how much trust and faith do we have that this is actually going to help us. And if we think this is probably not going to help, then we will resist it and we won't want to do the program because we don't actually have the belief that it's going to help. Or we may not believe our ability to put it into practice. We may think, well, other people can do it, but I don't have the wherewithal or the ability to retrain my brain. So all of these beliefs create barriers to actually engaging with the brain retraining, which is very natural. And in our program, we specifically address those resistances and barriers to doing it. Because when we speak to people who've successfully got 100% well, time and time again, the most critical success factor is just doing it.
Yeah.
Just doing the program, right?
That's the hardest part, though.
Yeah, it's the hardest part. And it's like learning to swim, right? Like we used the analogy earlier on about learning to drive, but learning to swim. If you read a book on how to swim, you could learn lots of great stuff, but it actually is completely irrelevant because you need to get in the water, you need to put your hands forward, and you need to learn to float and be buoyant and keep yourself afloat and then learn to swim. And that's going to require practice and getting stuck in there and jumping into the water, no matter the theory. And so in a similar way, you may understand the theory of what we're talking about, but it doesn't matter. It's about the practical repetition. And our brain learns through repetition, and that is only going to happen when we overcome our resistance. But I think people can when they understand the resistance. So resistance is like a magic trick. Your brain saying, I don't want to do it. I don't want to do it. And you are just resistant to it. So it's a magic trick. Once you realize, oh, my brain is only telling me not to do this because it's trying to protect me, or it thinks it's not going to work or whatever, then you can overcome that resistance and just jump in.
Yeah, it was still really difficult. I'm going to be honest. I still had a lot of resistance after I was like fully on board mentally. So it's still like something you have to do and get yourself to do. But the way that I think about it is like my limbic system wants me to stay vigilant and wants me to stay very alert because it believes that that's keeping me safe. So to go, let's just say meditation, which is just part of the program, but to go into a meditation is in a way overriding it, in a way saying we're actually safe. We actually don't need to be vigilant at this moment. And I think that's the hardest thing to do because pushing yourself is easy, especially for those of us with CFS. Pushing yourself is easy. Doing nothing, coming into calm, maybe it sounds easier to people who don't know, but that's actually the harder thing, but it is possible. I do it every day. I've been doing it and I'm still doing it until I fully recover.
And Karina, I was going to say, I mean, that is once again testament to yourself and the commitment to doing this. I mean, we constantly are researching this every day, like in terms of how can we make the program easier to use?
Yeah.
What other little brain tricks can we do to accelerate the healing? Like we have new somatic techniques. So we don't just have soften and flow. We have other somatic techniques now. And we're constantly thinking, how can we help people overcome the resistance, make it simpler to use? So now we have a 90-day program, which is, you don't even need to think about it. Step by step, day 1, do this. Day 2, do this. Day 3. So you don't even have to think about doing the program yourself. And these are all things that are helping people overcome the resistance and jump in and do the program correctly and in a way that's going to help them. And I think that what we say is always a phrase, do your best, leave the rest, which you obviously know very well, which is do what you can manage and don't stress yourself out too much. And some people, as you say, jump straight in and within days and weeks, they've healed and recovered. And others, they'll come to it, they'll have a resistance, they'll come back a year later, 6 months later, throw themselves back in and then they'll heal. So it's all about timing and when we're ready for it.
Yeah, people love, I think I was already too far into the program when the Gupta size came out, but people love the Gupta size because you follow along. And I don't, is that part of the 90-day or I don't know if that's.
It is, yes. So the 90 days is just a structure of how you go through the program, but the daily Gupta size is for anybody who's a premium member.
Yeah, so that's one thing that I know has made it a lot easier for a lot of people. Somebody did ask about MCAS. In my mind, I don't see MCAS as significantly different from either mold or MCS, but someone was saying, like, does it work the same for MCAS? I think that's what she said. So
Yeah, what happens with a lot of these conditions, there becomes like a trend of what is diagnosed in any particular period of time. So before it was, okay, this is chemical sensitivities. And now it's like MCAS is the common diagnosis, which is mast cell activation. And actually, as you say, mast cell activation is simply a mediator of these responses. So it's just describing the body's response to the chemical, whether it's mold or another chemical. And so mast activation, it's easier to test because we can tell, okay, the body is responding. There is some inflammatory responses going on. There's more debris as a result of that mast cell activation. And therefore, we have a concrete diagnosis. Someone has mast cell activation. But that is simply describing the immune's reactivity, but it is not giving you a diagnosis of what causes the immune system to be overreactive, or indeed what the cluster of symptoms are, or what chemical it's responding to. So yes, our program, we have many people with MCAS who use our program to heal from MCAS. And in our studies, as I said, 67% improvement with mold, 85% improvement with MCS, and 52% improvement with MCAS. And that was quite an old study. So with all the modern tools we've got now, we believe the outcomes would be even better.
Yeah, I don't have an official diagnosis, but I have like a throat swelling reaction, and the thing is, it's really random. Like, it doesn't stay consistent, which is like very good sign that it's limbic. But it is like the brain is very good at creating things that are legitimately scary. That's how it's working so well to keep us vigilant, because it's legitimately scary to have your throat swelling, whether it's severe or even when it's minor. So yeah, I just see it as like a very effective way. My brain right now is trying to stop me from trying this new medication. And again, these aren't like over time, something that I was reactive to, I'm no longer reactive to. Something that I'm no longer reactive to, I used to. It doesn't stay stable for me, because it is. And for some people, someone actually asked that in the pre questions too. It's like, but what if my symptoms are really stable? Is that a sign that it's not limbic? So, I mean, I would say no. But do you want to say, like, how do you know if it's limbic?
Yeah, it can be stable. It may be unstable. So each of us is having a unique response, because the brain's response, its learning, is unique to each of us. So in that moment that we were exposed to mold, or we were exposed to chemicals, that was a unique situation for us, a unique situation for the brain. There may have been other chemicals around at that same point in time. We may have had different emotional things going on in our lives. So the brain made a decision to respond, and that would be unique to all of us. And so whether your illness is just like that, stable, or it goes up and down, it can still be, as you've described, a limbic issue. And actually, it's so interesting. Somehow, for some reason, the word limbic and the limbic system has become synonymous with brain retraining. And interestingly, it's not, in our view, purely limbic. So the amygdala, part of our brain that sits behind our eyes, is the threat detection system. Yeah, part of our threat detection system. And that information gets proliferated around the brain. We believe the master that's dealing with all of this is the insular part of the brain that actually doesn't sit in the limbic system. It sits between the limbic and the cortex in the center of the brain. And the insula's job is to take in all the vast incoming data from the vagus nerve, from our environment, from our body, our heart rate, temperature, take information from the gut. So all the information from the gut goes into the insula, and even information from the amygdala itself. And the insula then says, right, what is the appropriate response to ensure survival and homeostasis? And we believe that the action is in the insula. It's the insula which has been trained to hyperreact and hyperrespond. And then it from that learning, it then keeps triggering the immune system and the nervous system. And therefore, there's some great studies that have been done recently, which I find absolutely fascinating. So when they give rats sweet water combined with an immunosuppressant, yeah, what happens is the rat's immune system goes down. And they repeat that 5 times. And then they give the rats just sweet water without the immunosuppressant. And guess what happens? The rat's immune system has been conditioned and learnt that sweet water is associated with immunosuppression. And so their immune system goes down just with sweet water. And when they analyze the brain, they find that it's the amygdala and the insula where the action is, that has caused that particular response. And they've done something similar with rats. This is Dr. Asia Roll's study, which I think is a groundbreaking study that everyone should be now studying. They took rats and they gave those rats an irritant for their gut, which caused inflammatory bowel disease. Essentially, an inflammatory gut as a result of an irritant. And they measured the electrical signature in the insula. And they brought these rats back to baseline, so these rats were completely normal. And then they triggered just the electrical signature in the insula. And they created inflammatory bowel disease in the guts of these rats in exactly the same way with no irritant. Now, if we transpose, so what that means is that the brain learns to respond to something, or the body learns to respond to an irritant, and that information flows and gets stored in the insular part of the brain, ready for the next situation. But maybe in the insula, it keeps triggering, getting overreactive, even when there's no physical danger, like you said, with COVID or long COVID. So in a similar way, could it be that in the brains of people with mold illness and chemical sensitivities, this part, the insula, from that initial exposure, it now has a set of neurons that say, anything that reminds me of that original chemical exposure, anything, even a tiny speck, is so life-threatening that we must trigger the immune system and nervous system at the slightest provocation. And that's what it's learned to do. So now we have animal studies proving this exact concept, which I think is very exciting, because now we've got objective medical data that says this isn't just a theory, this is what we're seeing in animal studies. And I think it's very exciting for the future.
Yeah, that is helpful. I mean, it's helpful to see because like the summary on the literature about MCS and about EHS is that they don't see a link. They cannot reproduce the link between the exposure and the reaction in the studies, but it doesn't like explain what's happening. So you're talking about studies that are actually more, instead of just kind of ruling things out, it's kind of showing what's actually happening, or giving us some of the clues at least.
Yeah, and that's what happens in medicine. You know, you have very disparate researchers all around the world, all researching different things, and it takes a while sometimes for all of these studies and this information to come together and coalesce to show us actually a really reasonable way of looking at things.
There's a question about, and this is actually a pretty common question as well, where a lot of people with MCS say this. They say, I still had the reaction even though I didn't have the smell, or like there wasn't a smell. It wasn't like smell, belief, reaction. It was without the smell. And it seems to me, and you can tell us how you see it in the Gupta program sees it, is that the smell is often a factor in many of these reactions, but the brain still picked it up. And so the brain is still going into that, like you just said, like how the sugar water, the brain still believes because it picked it up. You may not have picked it up with the detector level that your nose can, but like the brain still, some of the times it is just a belief that whether it's there or not. But I do think that there's also, is that how you see it, or do you see it just as the belief?
Yeah, so this is just to unpick this. Our sense of smell is simply one detecting factor of threat. So there are plenty of threats. Let's say there's a chemical that lands on your skin and you get a rash. There was no smell there, but your skin cells were able to detect threat, attract the white blood cells and the inflammatory chemicals to be able to defend your skin against that threat. Therefore, the olfactory system, which is our smell system, our threat detection system in terms of smell, is just one small aspect of an overall response. And all of this is happening unconsciously. So when we're responding to mold, chemicals, threats, it's an unconscious system that we aren't necessarily aware of. And we only become consciously aware of it when it's too late and the system has already started responding. But the moment the system has already started responding, we can still use brain retraining to train it that, yes, as unsafe as this might feel, we are safe. This is not a threat to us. And through repetition, the brain eventually gets the message. So yes, I can understand people thinking, well, I'm having these reactions. There's no smell. It doesn't matter. It can still happen.
Okay. Yeah, I think we're in agreement on that. I don't know if I can see all. How do I see all the comments? I think I can only see the latest ones. Someone was wondering why women get these illnesses more than men. I mean, I believe that there is evidence that women have a more sensitive nervous system. Is that your view, or do you think it's not really that relevant to even know?
Yeah, I think there is a reason. So when we look at chronic fatigue syndrome and ME, long COVID, chemical and mold, there is a propensity for more likely a woman will get it versus a man, although men will get these conditions as well. And I believe this fundamentally comes down to how the nervous and immune systems work in men versus women. And now I'm going to talk about things which might sound sexist, but I'm going to go for it anyway, and hopefully people will understand what I'm getting at here. So from a caveman perspective, if we go back into evolutionary biology, into previous ways that societies and tribes lived, it would be that a woman, once she reached, her childbearing age, would continually be pregnant to look after and obviously give birth and look after the child within the womb, and then afterwards as well. Whereas men would be the hunter-gatherers primarily in those tribes. Yeah? And that's how societies used to function before modern day era. And therefore, men's immune systems and women's immune systems needed to function slightly different. There was more of a protection mechanism within the woman's immune system that enabled her to make sure that she would keep the fetus safe and be able to give birth. Whereas a man's immune system, I think, works a little differently. It's not as overprotective and it's not as prone to conditioning effects, because if it was, then men would encounter some kind of threat, have the reaction in the brain, and then no longer be able to function correctly in the hunter-gatherer type of role in society versus a woman's role, or I suppose practical role, which was nurturing the fetus in the womb, required an immune system that was more overprotective for specific threats, so that the next time the woman was pregnant, it knew to respond appropriately to that. So in a nutshell, I believe that a woman's immune system is more fundamentally prone to conditioning than a man's immune system. And that would make a woman's immune system actually more effective than a man's immune system. But in this modern era, then actually makes it more reactive and therefore more prone to these types of illnesses and conditions.
That makes a lot of sense. Is there any practical implication to that in terms of how we do the program, or is that just helpful information to know about how we got here?
I think what it is it's saying it's useful information when our brain is trying to understand and make sense of it. I mean, even this is nothing too controversial. Many scientists will say a man and immune system works differently.
Yeah.
I think that the practical implication of it simply is the idea of safety. So if we think about now, once again, in our modern society, women are more likely to crave safety as a concept than men potentially are. And once again, we're talking in generalizations. We're all a mix of male and female energies. There are obviously many genders and transgender. So what we're talking about here is the fundamental aspect. There are female and male energies within us, and the female energy is more nurturing and protective, but also prone to craving more safety.
Yeah.
And therefore, if we imagine in that type of brain response, it's more prone to detecting threats and making sure we are safe. Because once again, if the woman is in a more vulnerable situation because she's pregnant, she's bearing a child, she doesn't have so many levers to defend herself, versus a man's immune system or threat detection system is not going to be so vulnerable to conditioning, because it recognizes that part of the hunter-gatherer role will be to encounter threats and be able to overcome them. And those threats could be a rival tribe, it could be a war, it could be all kinds of different things that men were more prone to engaging in previous. I'm not talking now, I'm talking about more tribal situations.
Yeah, I actually had that on my list of questions that I wanted to ask, but I thought maybe I'll see what the people want to ask. And luckily it came up, because I do find that a very interesting topic and a very true topic. So, okay, well, I can't see if anyone wants to re-ask a question, re-ask it now, because I cannot go back. I don't know why. But did you want to conclude with anything about the upcoming mold study you had mentioned?
Yes. So we've just completed a mold study, and we're crunching the numbers right now, or rather, an independent organization is going to be publishing the study. And I think that right now we don't have any initial results, so we don't know, but we hope that this will be a real inspiration and hope for many people with mold illness, because when we have objective scientific data that says brain retraining is more effective than a control group or a placebo, then that gives people inspiration that this is real, this is something that can help me. And I think the inspiration I want to leave people with is, no matter what you've been told by your doctor or a specialist or a support group or whatever it may be, we see people healing every day from mold illness and chemical sensitivities. And Corinne, you yourself are an inspiration to your community, that you have been on this and are continuing on this path to healing, that healing is possible. And that's the hope that I want to give people. And it will require a paradigm shift, and it will require starting with a blank sheet of paper and saying, I've been told all of this, and I've programmed my own brain to believe that mold is here, there's nothing I can do, I'm helpless with the mold in my home, and therefore I'm going to have these symptoms. And when we make that paradigm shift to actually it's my own brain's reactivity and I have influence and control over that, then we start empowering ourselves to want to take action, take our program, and heal and recover. And we see it every day, and that's the inspiration I want to give to people.
Yeah, I like, one of the key parts for me was shifting into, like, I'm empowered, I'm in an empowered state, I am responsible for my recovery, for my illness, even though it wasn't like my fault, everything that happened that led up to it, I'm now in a mode of full like responsibility and empowerment. But interesting.
Sorry to interrupt. On that point, many of us may be just waiting for a magic pill to come, right? Or some kind of, whether it be surgery or drugs or some kind of medical intervention that's suddenly going to save us from this. And what I would say to people is, recently I was presenting at a CFS conference in the US, and the leader there of that conference said, it's great that we've been meeting for 30 years, coming together, thousands of researchers, thousands of research papers. And yet in that 30 to 40 years of research, we've not come up with a single biomedical intervention that has been able to improve the lives of people with these conditions. Yeah? And that goes for mold illness, that goes for all of these other parallel conditions or common conditions. Fibromyalgia, long COVID, chronic fatigue, mold, POTS, all these. And so I would encourage people to realize the modern medical paradigm, if we're just going to sit and wait for something to come along, I believe people will be disappointed. This is a software problem, not a hardware problem. And it's only something through rewiring our brain can we get back to heal, to help.
Yeah, I'm very much in agreement with that. And, eventually it's going to get there to, where doctors are going to prescribe these programs. But most of us are too sick now to wait for that. Like that is, we don't want to get into a disempowered state even with that idea.
Yeah, and that's why we're constantly raising funds for clinical studies, because, as you know, clinical studies are really hard to get off the ground. We've now published 7 clinical studies, which has been a miracle. The support that we've had from different institutions, but we've published now 7 medical studies, 6 of which have been independent studies, and we're constantly raising funds through a 501c fund in the US to enable us to do more studies so we can inspire more people. And the more studies we have, eventually we want this treatment to be available on medical insurance and to be available through other means, through government-aided programs, so that it then becomes a mainstream treatment. Because what amazes us is there isn't anything out there that's showing results like what we're showing for all these conditions. The only issue is we don't have the big clinical studies of 500 to 1,000 people, which cost millions of dollars that only pharmaceutical companies can afford. But if we do those large scale studies and we have the funds, we can finally reach more people because it will be funded on insurance. And that's what we're aiming for.
Well, we were wrapping up, but I did remember that there was a question that had a few people saying, I second this, I third this, I fourth this, I fifth this. So can I stick in one more?
Of course, yeah, happy to.
So it was about, so people have a diagnosis of mold, CFS, etc. But then a lot of people have a second diagnosis of something that the medical community believes is incurable. And a lot of people didn't know how to go about it when they have these 2 parts. I had cranial cervical instability when I started, which is 99% better, and that's not supposed to be curable. So my personal belief system is like all of these, I mean, you could have like CFS and cancer, but that's not exactly what people are talking about. People are talking about more subtle, like, diagnosis. One was like a mitochondrial, unspecified mitochondria. The other was a type of vertigo that I'm assuming they had like diagnosed with a doctor. So I think the question, like
Yes.
you could get stuck at that point where it's like between the 2 things.
Our nervous system connects to every cell and organ in the body as an instructional system. It's like an information highway that tells the body what to do. The immune system is interconnected through all of our cells, all of our muscles, all of our organs. Those 2 systems are integrated. So if those 2 systems get disrupted, of course we are going to get secondary symptoms. So you mentioned a couple there, like vertigo, for instance, and dizziness. That is a natural consequence of our nervous and immune systems being dysregulated. And we see dizziness in many different conditions. So therefore, rather than thinking, oh, but I've got this secondary condition that I've been told is incurable, just seeing it as just yet another consequence of a dysregulated nervous and immune system. That is the core challenge or the core problem. And not getting too stuck into, well, why do I have this secondary thing? And it's been diagnosed and there's nothing I can do about it. Instead, we say, let's put our brain and our body in the optimal healing state. That means that we remove the stress, the strain, the negativity, the whatever else might be interrupting our body's ability to heal. It could even be a bad diet, that interrupts our body's ability to heal. It could be bad sleep, that interrupts our body's ability to heal. Let's put our system mentally, physically, and emotionally in the best state possible to give it the best fighting chance to heal. And therefore, it doesn't matter what those secondary things are. Let's not get bogged down in that. Using these tools, we can enable our body to heal from so many different things. And you're testament to that. You just said there was you had that cervical instability that you were told it was, incurable or can't be helped. And yet, through using brain retraining, you've 99% improved.
Yeah. I think a lot of those are downstream, but even if you had something, I don't know, like the type of diabetes that's the incurable type, you could still, I mean, there's a couple ways you could look at it. I don't know an example of somebody that actually has it, but let's say you have something like that. You could look at like how are people living with that, like some people are living with that and they're living well, like they take their medication and they're still living quite well. So why couldn't you recover to that stage? Or and like you said, some of them are, well, you didn't say that exactly, but I think it like some of them are helped by, like you said, the like giving your body the optimal conditions actually can help some of these more than cure. What the doctors say is doesn't have much of a cure. So it puts your body in the best position. A lot of people have reported on that in the Facebook group, which is the Gupta Facebook group, is a super helpful group to be in as well. It comes with the program.
Yes, exactly. So I think, as you say, it's understanding and believing that the system gets to its optimal state when you kind of get other things out of the way. Right? We know chronic stress, which is often what the system is now stuck in, interferes. We know from psychoimmuno. It's actually really late here, so I'm forgetting my words now because it's like 11 o'clock here. But psychoneuroimmunology tells us that our emotions and our state of mind directly influence our immune system. So we know that. So putting our system into its optimal state enables the body to heal in its own way, in its own time.
Okay, well, I think that was the final question. Is there anything to add about the program or anything else?
Yeah, no, we just love for people to take our free trial. So we'd love for people to come to our website, download the free app, and they can start understanding, watch videos straight away. There's audio exercises. There's lots of content that's free. So you don't even have to necessarily purchase a program or pay anything, but at least you're getting a deeper understanding. You're beginning to retrain your brain, and we'd love for people to just download the free app.
Okay, great. There's an affiliate link in the comment section. So that's where you can go. All right. Well, Ashok, we are both getting tired, but it's been good. I think we got to a lot of the questions, and
We did.
yeah, I'm glad we got to so many of them. And thank you so much for being here.
Yeah, thank you, Corinne, for inviting me and giving me the opportunity to share all of this. So thank you so much.
Okay. Bye for now.
Great. Thanks. Bye.
Bye.